I wanted to start by saying what a tremendous honor and a genuine pleasure it is to be speaking with you today. A tremendous honor and a genuine pleasure. Or to put it another way, a tremendous honor and a genuine pleasure. And if you haven't worked it out by now, I'm going to be speaking to you about sarcasm. You may have noticed, well, in fact, you've been explicitly told that I'm English. This used to be a nationality, now it's more of an apology. And throughout history, there are many things that have been identified as the English disease. Skin disease, scrofula, homosexuality during the 19th century, and more recently, football hooliganism. Well, the good news is scrofula is now easily treatable, homosexuality is nothing to be ashamed of, and football hooliganism even has been transformed into a political movement called Brexit. But the real English disease, in my opinion, is sarcasm. It's our less exotic version of malaria. When I moved to Latvia 10 years ago, I really hoped that I could escape the all-encompassing fog of English sarcasm. But to my dismay, it seems to me that I've acted as some sort of carrier for this disease, and that Latvians are becoming more and more sarcastic. So in talking about it today, I'm hoping really to inoculate you against this pernicious disease. You've still got a chance. This all came to a head not long ago when I was reading a review someone had written of one of my really excellent books, which was on the whole quite a positive review. But at the end, it was an online review, there was a comment section and someone had written, "Yeah, but what sort of thing does he write?" And the answer really dismayed me. The answer was, he writes sarcasm. Well, I was very, very worried about this because I was convinced that I wasn't writing sarcasm, but I decided to have a look at my writing and my speech and see if I really was sarcastic. So at this point in a presentation, it's traditional either to do some clicky stuff, but the good news is I can't do PowerPoint, so I've only got 2 slides, or to read out a dictionary definition of the subject that we're talking about. I'm a traditionalist, so I'm going to read out the dictionary definition. And looking at dictionary definitions of sarcasm, you immediately hit one of the problems, which is that people give it far more credit than it really deserves. They talk about things like satire, irony, wit. Well, it's my contention that that sarcasm is not satirical, it's not witty, and it's not particularly ironic. It's something a lot cruder, simpler, and less likable than that. But let's turn to one of the typical dictionary definitions, which is one of the better ones, actually. Sarcasm, the use of remarks that clearly mean the opposite of what they say, made in order to hurt someone's feelings or to criticize something in a humorous way. Well, even that's a little bit strange. It's something which is hurtful, but which is also humorous. I think we need a better definition of sarcasm. There's very little academic literature been produced about sarcasm. The best thing that I could find is a book published in 1998 by an academic called John Hayne. It's called Talk is Cheap. Hayne considers all sorts of different varieties of insincere language. There's things like euphemism, understatement, overstatement, banter, politeness, prayers, even just asking someone, "How are you?" in a sense is insincere language. We're not really interested in their health. We're just getting the social interaction going. But Hayne has what I think is a pretty good definition of sarcasm. Sarcasm is a particularly transparent variety of cheap talk or hot air, insofar as the speaker is overtly meaning and saying the opposite of what he or she claims to be saying. So it's a game of opposites. Black equals white, good equals bad, but it's also avoidance of meaning. You're saying something which supposedly is the opposite of your meaning, but you're also denying your meaning at the same time. This is what puts sarcasm in a category of its own compared to other forms of insincere language. It denies its own content. The sarcast, which is the technical term, but I prefer sarcasist because it sounds a little bit funnier, they only say what they do not believe, and this, in my opinion, cannot be a healthy state of affairs. Now, the first thing we need to clear up is the difference between sarcasm and irony. Irony, I think, can reach into quite rich and paradoxical areas of human expression. It can reach into self-deprecation. It can reach into all sorts of the areas of the absurd, which sarcasm, with its black equals white, good equals bad, simply does not. And Hayne has a very good sort of rubric here that we can use for identifying whether something is sarcastic or ironic. So situations can be ironic, but only people can be sarcastic. So let's take an example. You might say, this guy on the stage is cleverer than the Riga-born philosopher Sir Isaiah Berlin. You'd probably say it sarcastically in order to hurt my feelings. So that's sarcasm. For irony, I could say, well, ironically, a year ago, I was sitting exactly where you're sitting now on Sir Isaiah Berlin Day, watching a film about Sir Isaiah Berlin, which made me realize how much cleverer he was than me. So, sarcasm is present tense only. Irony refers to some previous event or previously established fact. Therefore, I would claim that irony is cleverer than sarcasm, just as Isaiah Berlin is cleverer than me. Now, one quotation that everyone in the English-speaking world at least knows about sarcasm is, sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. And who said it? Allegedly, Oscar Wilde, the man responsible for saying 99% of all witty things ever, if you believe some people. And also, I think the man largely responsible for the identification of sarcasm with wit, which I think is unwarranted. Now, a lot of people know that quotation, but very few people know the second half of the quotation, which is, sarcasm is the lowest form of wit, but the highest form of intelligence. There are a few variations on that. It's one of these things that's attributed to Wilde, but no one seems to know exactly when or where he said it, but we won't argue the point at the moment. The trouble with that statement is, on the one hand, he's probably being sarcastic, in which case it kind of negates it. It sounds great. Again, we have like highest and lowest. Lowest form of wit, highest form of intelligence. But when you think about it, as a real, genuine statement of belief, it's meaningless. And Wilde, I think, has a bit of form when it comes to the use of sarcasm to sound clever. You just look at some of the titles of some of his plays. So you've got Woman of No Importance, which is about a woman who's quite important. An Ideal Husband, about a husband who's far from ideal. And his best-known play, which at least I'm going to use in this presentation, which is The Importance of Being Earnest. His most famous play, trouble, of course, is well, he was probably being sarcastic when he said it, and I'm not. So I do think it's important to be earnest. Now we know what sarcasm is, we need to know how to spot it. As we've already said, it relies upon the listener to qualify as sarcastic. So if I'm being sarcastic and you don't realize I'm being sarcastic, I'm not really being sarcastic, I'm being a poor communicator, just like I'm being right now. So there are two basic forms of identifying sarcasm. There are linguistic and demonstrative terms. So linguistic would be simply placing emphasis or placing what's called a tag at the beginning or the end of an otherwise quite obvious statement. So, I care about that. You could do the Wayne's World approach. I care about that. Not. You can switch the tag to the front. I suppose I care about that. Or you can put it at the front and the back, in which case the meaning becomes really confused. Not that I care about that, or anything. So basically any marker which draws attention to the words spoken rather than the actual meaning of the words will tend to be interpreted sarcastically. And that's why we find quotation marks, when they're inappropriately used, they're another tag, so amusing. So I care about that. Or welcome to Latvia. We hope you have a great holiday. The other type of tag which is commonly used would be the demonstrative tag, what I would call the demonstrative tag, which is like rolling your eyeballs, winking, so I care about that. I care about that. I care about that. It's like the Monty Python nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more annoying character. He's intensely sarcastic and intensely annoying. Now, let's take another example and explore this symphony of sarcasm that's at our fingertips. We'll take another simple statement. What a great lecture this is. 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 So you can see we can place the emphasis on pretty much any word there and we get the sarcastic effect. At least is sarcasm proof, right? Or is it? Now I'm hamming it up a bit in my delivery, but you get the idea. And I realize this is quite a lot to take in at one go. So I've ridden to the rescue and I've come up with a formula, an equation of sarcasm. Newton had his laws of motion. Einstein had his beautiful theory of relativity. And now in a world first, here in Riga, TEDxers, you're going to be able to tell your grandchildren that you were here at the revealing of Collier's first law of sarcasm. S, it's quite simple, S equals P divided by I consists of L plus or minus D, where S is sarcasm, P is the proposition in the negative, I is the indicator consisting of L, linguistic, or D, demonstrative particles, or both. It's quite simple, right? There's an even easier way to remember it. Spilled. I'm quite proud of that, and I'll be getting some t-shirts printed, which will be available in the foyer after the lecture. Thank you. Took a long time. So why am I anti-sarcasm? Because we Brits, we're supposed to love sarcasm, right? Well, partly it's because it's usually quite obvious and boring, and partly because it's very addictive. When I looked at my writing after the comment that I saw earlier on, I saw that, to my relief, it wasn't particularly sarcastic, I would say. I would say it was highly ironic, but not sarcastic. But my conversation definitely was too sarcastic for comfort. Sometimes Latvian friends tell me that I'm sarcastic, and they mean it as a compliment. I smile and go along with it. But the problem is the sarcasm is essentially a form of lying. It's a form of saying what you don't mean. And if you replace the word sarcasm with the word lying and make the same sort of statements, you get some unusual results. So for instance, that's good old British lying. He's so funny when he lies. How would I describe his character in a single word? Liar. So you can see where my problem is, where I'm coming from on this. But the biggest problem with the extended use of sarcasm is that after a while you stop noticing that you're being sarcastic. It gets even worse because if you do want to say something sincerely, people won't believe you when you object to it. So I do believe that, honestly, and everyone will laugh and say, look, he's being sarcastic again. So if you've caught a dose of this malarial sarcasm from me, how do we treat it? Well, I've got 4 quick suggestions. The first would be sincerity, simply saying what you mean. But this is quite problematic. It's kind of the equivalent of making a drug addict do cold turkey or hiding the bottles from an alcoholic. Maybe it's a bit too hardcore to go into straight away. A second approach would be citation. If you're not sure of your own opinion, or just use someone else's, by which I mean quote poetry, scientists, investigators, whatever. You'll probably find your own opinion and belief about something forming quite naturally as a result. A third alternative is imagination. Just embrace the absurd. You don't have to provide a boring answer to a boring question. You stand on your head, freak out, anything rather than the tired trick of sarcasm. And finally, something that I would love to see come back is the 18th century dramatic technique of the aside. So where you'd have 2 actors speaking on stage, having a conversation, and they'd be turning to the audience every now and again and saying what they truly feel. So for instance, I might say to you, what do you think of my new book? And you would reply, it's like nothing I've ever read, because I haven't read it. So is sarcasm always bad? Well, not always, but it needs to be treated with caution. In Japanese culture, there's a mode of speech called ruakuka, nothing to do with cakes, which is used by young lovers when they're first getting to know each other. They give each other sort of mild insults to avoid the embarrassment of genuine feelings of affection. But this is like a well-tended little bonsai garden, compared to the vast, bleak moorland of English sarcasm. As far as writers are concerned, there are very few who I think are able to deploy sarcasm in an effective way, but one of them is one of my heroes, Jonathan Swift, who incidentally was also the literary hero of George Orwell. Not that I'm trying to make you think Swift, Orwell, Collier. That's the last thing on my mind. Now, I'll give you an example of full-strength, uncut Swiftian sarcasm from a poem written in 1730 with the very sarcastic title, An Excellent New Ballad. And for anyone who thinks that Jonathan Swift is a children's writer and that Gulliver's Travels is a children's tale, you're in for a bit of a shock, I'm afraid. Just absorb these 6 lines of absolutely dripping sarcasm, well, 5 lines of sarcasm, which set up the last line, which is not sarcastic, and has real kick as a result. So, an excellent new ballad. Our brethren of England, who love us so dear, and in all they do for us, so kindly do mean, a blessing upon them, have sent us this year, for the good of our church, a true English dean. A holier priest never was wrapped up in crape. The worst you can say, he committed a rape. It's a swinging indictment of a church which is moving a sex-offending priest from parish to parish to avoid scandal. Well, how do you react to something like this? Well, you could write like Swift. You could make a film like Spotlight. Or, as I would recommend, you say what you really mean and what you condemn. So in conclusion, just say yes to sarcasm, by which I mean no. It was a pleasure and an honor speaking with you today. Thank you.